San Diego de Compostela. The name of Compostela came from the Latin word compositum, which means cemetery. Nowadays, San Diego is the second Catholic pilgrimage center after Rome. A small church was first built over the tomb of St. James shortly after it was discovered in 1980. The city was attacked by the Normans during 954 to 997 and destroyed by Almanzor, who respected the apostolic tomb. This was destroyed by Almanzor's Moorish army in 997, though Almanzor left the relics of the apostles undisturbed. He did, however, force San Diego citizens to carry the bells of the tower to the mosque in Cordoba. They have since been returned. In the 10th century, Diego, the first bishop, began the cathedral's construction. Diego continued his work 1 century after. The cathedral suffered major modification in the 17th and 18th centuries. The clock tower, a work of Domingo de Andrade, was added in 1676. The Camino de San Diego was a major communication link between the different peoples in Europe for several centuries. It was the place where the cultural, artistic, and trade exchanges took place in the Middle Ages, where during the Middle Ages the shrine of San Diego became one of the greatest of all Christian shrines. St. James may be seen on the middle pier, carrying a banner that reads, "The Lord sent me." The tree of Jesse, meant to show the holy lineage of Christ, is below St. James. Behind the portico is a statue said to be of the head architect and a sculpture of the portal and the cathedral, Mastro Matteo. The story goes that if you bump your head 3 times against the statue, some of Matteo's genius will rub off on you. Despite its Baroque facade, the present Cathedral of San Diego is predominantly Romanesque. Various elements were added in the later centuries, culminating in the dramatic Baroque transformation of the exterior in the 16th to 18th centuries. The interior of the cathedral, however, retains its pure early Romanesque style. Entrance to the cathedral is through the magnificent Portico della Gloria, carved in 1188 by Mastro Matteo and considered one of the finest works of medieval art. Originally the exterior west door, it now stands just inside, behind the newer Baroque facade. The shafts, tympana, and archivolts of the 3 doorways are a massive sculpture depicting the Last Judgment. Faint traces of color remain on some of the carvings, which represents the culmination of Romanesque sculpture and the beginnings of Gothic realism. On either side of the portal are prophets of the Old Testament, including Daniel, who seems to be smiling. The arches over the side doors represents purgatory at the Last Judgment, with Christ in glory presiding in the center. He flanked by the 4 evangelists and surrounded by the 24 elders of the Apocalypse, playing medieval musical instruments. The string instrument at the top center is the organistrum, an example of which can be seen in the crypt. Those to the south contains a light and an elegant arcade to the upper windows, serving as a screen to the late cloisters. Underneath the cloister is the Bucaria Archaeological Museum, housed in Matteo's original stone choir, and the remains of the 13th century cloister, built in 1533 by the future Archbishop of Toledo. The cloisters are said to be the largest in Spain. Below the Christ figure on the central column is a statue of St. James, and at the bottom a self-portrait of Mastro Matteo. Since the Middle Ages, it has been the custom of pilgrims to pray with their fingers pressed into the roots of the tree of Jesse below St. James. The heavily carved portal in the narthex of the cathedral is widely considered the gem in the jewel box of the cathedral. The figures are carved with astonishing depth. One test to estimate the difficulty in executing a sculpture is the amount of shadow you can see, shadow being indicative of the depth of the carving and their ability to naturally replicate the way light would fall off fabric and faces. Mateo exhibited unusual skills for his time in showing recognizable emotions on the face of his sculpted figures. Early medieval figures often look either emotional or have a generic face that one would not recognize if the person portrayed walked by. Mateo's sculptures, particularly the larger ones, have both individualized, recognizable faces and a sense of emotions to their expressions. A closer look at the sculpture shows some traces of color. These sculptures were originally painted, a technique known as polychrome. This runs contrary to the idea that we tend to have about sculpture, that Romanesque sculpture is the color of the natural stone, and indeed that Greek and Roman sculpture is meant to look like pure bronze or marble. In fact, most Greek and Roman sculptures were painted, as were marble building facades, and a good number of Romanesque sculptures were originally colored as well. The altar is an impressive blend of Gothic simplicity and 18th century Churriguesque exuberance. A bejeweled medieval statue of the saint stands at the altar. In the cathedral's chapel of the reliquary is a gold crucifix dated 874, containing a piece of the true cross. The cathedral museum displays tapestries and archaeological fragments. One of the most typical elements of a good pilgrim is the shell. It was used to dip water from streams on the way. The overall subject is the Last Judgment, when the dead rise from their graves to be judged by Christ. The central tympanum, the decorated arch above the portal, shows Christ in majesty. Medieval artists tended to depict the most important figures as larger than those less important. The left tympanum shows scenes from the Old Testament, while the right tympanum shows the division of souls into heaven, with Christ and the archangel, purgatory and hell. Revered body of St. James lies beneath the high altar in a silver coffer that can be viewed from the crypt. His ornamented bust sits above his grave. So many pilgrims have laid their hands on the pillar just inside the doorway to rest their exhausted bones that a groove has been worn in the stone. The relics still rest in the cathedral and were referred to as authentic in a bull of Pope Leo XIII in 1884.